What's up, O'Brien Army? So, I wanted to tell you all about my troubled childhood. I faced a lot of abuse from a lot of people as a child, but I'm going to tell you the story about one particular person who made life really hard for me. Now, you all know that I have autism, and that brings enough challenges to my life. But this person, he made life a lot worse for me. So he would often set all these stupid rules. He would always force us to go to bed at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, even though we were teenagers. Get that, I was 13 to 14 years old at that time. I was between the ages of 13 and 15 at this time. So he would always force us to go to bed at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the afternoon. And then he'd turn around and say, "Oh, I put them to bed at a decent time. They go to bed at 8 o'clock." But he was lying, and he knew he was lying. I couldn't correct him, or else he'd get pissed off and retaliate. So the next thing, I couldn't be happy. I could not be happy around him or energetic. Every time I got energetic and made a little noise, I'd be grounded to my room for 2 weeks. He would always complain and rant every time he didn't get his way. He would throw a fit like a little child, and then he'd stand there and rant and complain until things started going his way again. He was always upset whenever he started grounding people. He always went too hard on me. He always went too hard on me. So I would be forced to sit alone in my room for all frickin' day, and I couldn't make a single sound. Because if I got loud, he'd come in and complain at me again. And any attempts to try to stand up to him in any way were met with emotional abuse. He emotionally abused me every time I tried to stand up to him. It was terrible. He would often complain and rant about a lot of stuff that wasn't going his way, and he would spend the majority of his time in the garage. And when all the time he spent in the house, don't get me wrong, there were a couple moments every here and there where we were talking to each other and having a good time, like a family should. Everything was fine, but most of the time it was just outrageous. It was just outrageous. So, another thing is, he would often be stingy with anything he gave me. I had an iPad at the time. That was what I was recording with in the beginning. It was his favorite punishment in the whole world to take that away from me. He always took it away from me first thing, and then he'd ground me if I didn't already have it taken. And then he'd ground me if I had already had it taken. He'd keep me from using it all the time. He'd rule over my life, and he'd force me to watch things that are PG and rated E, educational children's shit. I got tired of it after a while. I was just fed up with all the children's shit. But he forced me to not watch anything more than PG-13. And a lot of times he if he started ranting and complaining, he wouldn't just complain at me. He would complain at my mom too. There were times when it got so bad that my mom literally had stress related seizures because of all the stress he put her through. She literally had seizures because of all the stress that he put her through. I could have just ran away at any time. The problem was I feared for my mom's safety if I would have ran away. I feared that he might beat my mom or something if I would have ran away. I feared that he'd beat my mom or something if I would have ran away. So I was forced to just stay there and take it. And I would have chosen to stay and take it anyway because I didn't want my mom to be alone in the situation. So I had to stay with her and endure it till the end. Now, this may not seem like it's all that bad, but trust me, when you live with that kind of behavior every single day, it gets stressful quick. He would often emotionally abuse me every time I tried to stand up to him. Every time I tried to stand up to him, it would be met in any way, it would be met with emotional abuse. He would yell a lot, he would complain, he would try to force me to sleep. He he would always ground me too. And to make matters worse, every time I got off punishment from being grounded, I would be so happy and I'd get a little energetic, and then he'd turn around and ground me again just for that. Now, you guys know me. I'm a very energetic person. I always have been. I couldn't just sit there in one spot for several hours. I had to move around. I had to move around at some point. That energy had to come out somehow. But I was barely allowed to go outside to play. I was barely allowed to go outside to play. I was never allowed to have friends over. And the only time I was allowed to leave the property that I lived on was if I was going to school or if I was with my mom. And my mom didn't like to get out a whole lot. Oftentimes, it felt like he was setting me up to fail, blaming me, and then punishing me. It felt so hard. There were times when I could literally feel myself going insane. And I probably still suffer from psychological damage because of this. Today, life's not as hard as it was back then, so it's not as bad. And to make matters worse, all of this caused me to have anger issues. I would always have behavior issues caused by him, and then he'd punish me for it even though he started it. I could have told him. I could have told him that it was his fault, but then he'd punish me harder. I have flashbacks of this stuff all the time. So there was one time when I decided I had enough and I couldn't take it anymore, and I tried to commit self-harm, only to end up in the hospital that same day for 3 to 4 days in a row. And that whole time, that person was in the room with me, trying to stop me from being happy. Now, usually, someone who wants to hurt themselves being happy and smiling, that's a serious sign of improvement. He should have been appreciating that. But no, he would always say, "Oh, this is a serious thing. I want you to stop smiling." But he didn't even care that it was a big improvement. He he was always mean to me. He rarely ever hit me. I'll tell you that. He rarely ever hit me. It was extremely rare that he ever hit me or spanked me because I was too old for it. But he would complain and rant a lot when things didn't go his way. I always felt like he was ignorant and he wouldn't listen to me. There were a few times when I threatened to run away and the whole house broke out into chaos. Everybody was upset. It was just too much. It was just too much. There were a lot of times when I could just feel myself going insane slowly. I had a bunch of imaginary friends to keep me company during all that time I was grounded, because it was the only thing I had to protect what was left of my sanity from wearing thin. There were a lot of times when I would feel like I couldn't even breathe around him. It felt hard to breathe in some situations. Now, I'm not going to say his name. Because I don't want to risk any retaliation if he sees this video. He's no longer with the family, because eventually when I was 17 or 18, no, definitely when I was 17, my mom finally decided she had had enough of him and said she wanted a divorce. And so it was. So he's not in our family anymore. But having him as a dad was a nightmare. And not the good kind either. There were a lot of times when I was hurting, emotionally hurting, because of him. And he would always act like he didn't care. And then later on, when I started crying, I would always cry loud enough for him to hear it, just to show him that I was hurting, that I was emotionally suffering. And he would come in and he would try to baby me just to get me to stop crying and go to sleep. I couldn't even handle it anymore. I broke down in tears a bunch of times because of his crap. I cared about him as my stepdad, don't get me wrong, but damn, it was a lot. And he always, whenever he emotionally abused me, he would always make it seem like it was my fault for some reason. I thought about running away plenty of times. There was one time when I actually tried to run away, but never made it out of the house, because my parents were complete assholes that whole time, and they were trying to force me to stay. I was just trying to remove myself from the situation. And I'll be honest, I wouldn't have been planning to come back at all if I would have been successful in running away. I don't care what would have happened. I wouldn't have come back. I wouldn't have willingly come back if I would have been successful in running away. I wouldn't have come back. I would have been gone forever. But when my mom and that stepdad were forcing me to stay and acting like children, complaining to me about it, I was forced to think about my mom. What would happen to her if I would have ran away and left her alone in this situation? I feared that my stepdad might beat her or something. And there were times when he would bicker and argue with my mom whenever things weren't going his way. It was a disaster. And to make matters worse, he was my stepdad for a long time. I think he officially came into the family when I was 6 or 7. Yeah, I think it was when I was 6 or 7 when he came into the family. And the divorce happened when I was 16 or 17. So that's close to 10 years that he had known me. 10 years of chaos. 10 years of chaos, dude. It just sucks that people can stand to put their kids through this. I just couldn't leave my mom alone in that situation. I don't even think I could relive it anymore. But I'm constantly having flashbacks of the emotional abuse he put me through. Constantly having flashbacks. It blows my mind that some people can stand to put their kids through so much suffering and then pretend that everything was fine. It just hurts to know that so much hurt can be brought upon children before parents finally realize that they're the problem. I don't think he ever realized that he was the problem. I think he was too busy being childish and making me feel like it was my fault for some reason. That's probably what he was thinking. It got it got me so hurt whenever he did that. Whenever he started complaining, my head would get real hot. It would always make my head hurt. And this caused problems for when I was at school. Whenever I was at school, my life at home caused problems for my life in school. I had to pretend to be someone I wasn't just just to feel okay at school. And I couldn't even keep myself together in school. I got sent to a private school with kids that were out of their minds just because my parent my that stepdad, oh, that stepdad put me through so much stress. I was always in a bad mood at school. I couldn't stay in class for a long period of time. And it just sucked to be me. So I ended up being taken out of that school and put at one of those restriction schools. Not exactly a charter school, but I never went back to a public school. I had to go to a school that was miles away from my house just to get to school and back. I couldn't even contain myself. I was always upset because of it. I was always in a bad mood because of it. I had so many imaginary friends because of all the suffering I was put through. They kept me company the whole time, and I still have those imaginary friends. Anyway, that's going to be all for today. Like and subscribe, leave a comment, click the bell notifications, and I'll see you in the next one.